Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and the podcast is Life Along the Merrimack. Each week, we meet for about a half hour on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock, and we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River on 96.3 Joppa Radio and Channel 9 local cable TV. Today, I'm going to be doing some reporting. Now, for about 4 decades, I was a reporter. And the last stop on this was with the Daily News here in Newburyport. And so several things have come to the fore in recent weeks, and I just wanted to talk about them, and I'll also be showing some slides. Number one, last night, Monday, there was a very interesting program hosted by Storm Surge. Now, this is a local volunteer organization. It started in Newburyport about 5 or 6 years ago. And they're trying to make plans for what's going to happen when we have more surging of the river, more erosion on Plum Island, and higher tides. Now, if you're watching this on cable, and I know some people listen, some people watch, but if you're watching this on cable, you can see a surging Merrimack River. This was in 1936, and it was in Manchester, New Hampshire, as you can see. So sometimes the Merrimack is quite tranquil, but other times, as you see here, it was just remarkable in terms of a flood. One of the things in last night's Storm Surge program that they talked about was the history of Plum Island. And this was really intriguing to me because going back a century or a bit more, Plum Island had a very active life for the public. There were dance halls, there were big hotels. And in fact, one of my friends, Dick Canepa, who lives in Newburyport and grew up in the 40s and 50s, remembers going to Plum Island when they had roller skating. You could roller skate all afternoon and indoors for 35 cents. So the Storm Surge people showed some wonderful old photos. Now, all the hotels are gone, and most of the buildings down there now are being put up by very wealthy people, and we can talk about that in a moment. But that was one thing I loved, was the photos of old Newburyport and what it looked like. It also brought out the concern that even by 2030, the projection is that there'll be much more flooding on Plum Island, and that includes Sunset and Northern Boulevards. And many houses will be under duress from erosion. Now, we know that there is a lot of erosion at Plum Island anyway. Even in the 5 years I covered, 4 or 5 houses just fell off of the dunes and the Newbury side of Plum Island. Right now, they're having a lot of trouble in Reservoir Place with more erosion and more water coming into neighborhoods. So it's very interesting to see these statistics about even 2030, which is only 9 years away. The storms, when they do come along, bring a great deal of water, and a lot of houses in the center of Newbury. You may know where the Beachcomber restaurant is there, and there's several other stores there. All of those places can be under 2 feet of water as a regular situation. Now, that has happened already, and the Storm Surge folks did show pictures in recent years of how much on a high tide with a lot of water coming in. And this is curious to me because right now, as we speak, Tuesday, there are backhoes down at the center, just where you come on to Plum Island after you've crossed the bridge. They're actually taking down what used to be an auto repair shop there on the left on the corner, and they're putting up a new building. And it does raise the question of, the people who are building the building, looking into the future and seeing, at least according to these projections, that there's going to be tides 2 and 3 feet higher at times. And so they better build certainly above the ground by several feet. It also mentioned in about 10 years, people on the island could be seeing more water coming into their properties, even if they are elevated. Now, a lot of residents there have elevated their homes and they put their cars under the house. But the proposition was that with so much storm surge and higher water coming in future years, that some of these cars might be under duress by 2 or 3 feet. So it's an interesting look at the future done by scientists, done by people who, some are town officials of Newburyport or city officials of Newbury, and city officials of Newburyport. And, they're talking and they're not trying to scare people, but I think we know that higher water is coming. Now, one caller, well, no one called in, it was all Zoom, but one question was, and I found this intriguing, is how much money is this costing? And it turns out that it costs many $1 million each year to keep Plum Island going in some way. Some of it's town money from Newbury, some of it's city money from Newburyport. A lot of it's state money, a lot of it's federal money, but it's costing many, many $1 million to keep Plum Island in a way where people get out there regularly, where people who live there in the winter have good access to it. So it raises, a terrific question on, how do we deal with this in the future? And how do we start our conversation? Because more homes and buildings are being constructed there every year. More dunes are being taken down in order to put houses up. So it's a difficult situation because people want to live on Plum Island, especially now. I think we know that prices are very high. Plum Island is very desirable. And I will say, if I had money, I'd probably like to live on the water too. I had a pal, a real pillar of the community, Josiah Welch. Some of you may have known him or heard of him. He was a leading businessman here in town, owned an insurance company. He was on the board of the Newburyport Public Library for 45 years. And he had a place, I think, on about 49th Street, just about the last street in Newbury. And I'd be invited there occasionally. And it was just gorgeous. It was beautiful to sit there on the deck, and the ocean's beautiful, the dunes are beautiful. So I can see why people want to live out there. But a couple of people raised questions last night of how much this is costing. As I say, it's many millions of dollars. And I think this will be addressed in the future. Like, there's been close to $10 million in federal money, $5 million in state money. The state and then Newburyport and Newbury have both been putting in money. Now, one element that frustrates me, and again, I don't live on the island, is that each year it gets more difficult to park out there. In fact, there's a new set of signs in Newbury it must be every 50 to 100 feet, and that's not an exaggeration, which says there will be no parking on the side of the public road here. You have to have a Newbury full-time resident sticker on your car to park there. And Newburyport has similar signs. But this is my question. We are told, and we know that millions of federal, state, and thousands of local dollars are going in to help improve the roads, to help stop erosion, to come up with plans to deal with the storm surge and deal with the erosion that's coming. But most people can't park there. Taxpayers can't park there. This is true. Now, you can park in the refuge, and you can park in the one lot at the north end of Newburyport. But I think my own personal 2 cents here is, as we continue to give money to these people so that Plum Island can be preserved, essentially, and people can get there who live there, I think it would also be useful to talk about, well, can taxpayers get to park there? And if not, why? When I was a journalist at the Daily News, a couple mornings after a big weekend, I get calls from people, a guy from Lawrence called and it said, geez, I went to Plum Island yesterday, took my 4 kids and my wife, we had a great time, and I came back and I had a big ticket on my car. It was close to $90. Well, he may have been exaggerating, but say it was 50. That's a lot. And so I think this is something, as we talk about storm surge, that it has to be more of a public awareness. And in recent years, of course, more houses are being built. Many are very close to the water. And frequently, as soon as those wealthy homeowners move in, they realize that they're threatened by erosion and different challenges. The ocean is coming up higher. We know that. Storm surge is among the groups telling us that. But they are very concerned. They want more help. And you may remember several months ago, the city of Newburyport put out these very large bags of sand near Reservoir Terrace, which is at the north end, maybe 150 bags of sand in plastic bags. And so it was a very high tide. Most of the plastic bags were demolished by a very surging surf. And so what you had was an enormous amount of plastic bags, either on the shore or floating in the ocean. I mean, we get annoyed when there's plastic bottles or beer cans come up on shore. And it was quite remarkable to see that this effort to put 150 plastic bags of sand to hold back the Great Atlantic, most of them burst. All the plastic ended up in the ocean. And so that was not a good plan. And in recent years, and Storm Surge presentation last night pointed it out, there's been numerous rubble put in and boulders put in, much of it in the Newbury end, to hold back the erosion. Now, several years ago, I recall, many boulders were put in. Now, this is far down, almost to the refuge. The boulders were put in, sand was accumulated and put over the boulders, and for about 3 days, it was looking good. And then, of course, the Atlantic, being the incredible institution that it is, just came up, took all the sand away. So what you now have is a once beautiful beach strewn with very large boulders. And of course, you couldn't take a youngster there or even yourself because, during a high tide, for instance, you'd be swimming and then you may come crashing down, not on the sand, but on these boulders. So it's something that it is being looked into. That's why I brought it up. Storm Surge did have that event. And so it was very intriguing to me. And I think my next book is going to be about Plum Island, as a matter of fact. What really intrigues me more so than the erosion, I must say, is just the beautiful old life there was there. The hotels, the roller skating rink I mentioned, there were dance halls. And in fact, probably about 100 years ago, maybe a bit more, there was a railroad car that started in downtown Newburyport and chugged all the way down to Plum Island, let people off. So you didn't have to have a car. You could have a picnic, you could have whatever. And so it was a big day at Plum Island. And if you've seen the photos, and I've been to the archive in Newburyport many times, the photos are so romantic and the hotels looked wonderful. Most of them burnt down eventually. And so now, of course, we have a completely new arena, and that is since about 2002 or 2003, when sewer pipes went out there, when water pipes went out there, the shacks started disappearing, and the very large, expensive houses started going in there. And so again, it's a beautiful thing if you can build $1 million house. Now, I think we're starting to reflect, well, what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years? And what is the public responsibility to keeping up the utilities on Plum Island? So that was very interesting to me. And there's another event by storm surge tonight at Cashman Park. I am going there because John McCone, who was a former editor of the Daily News, is speaking about challenges to the artichoke, where we get our water, and some challenges to the Merrimack River. Now, Newburyport residents do not get their drinking water from the Merrimack, but 500,000 people do. That's an amazing number. 500,000, some in Lawrence, North Andover, Lowell. They're still getting their water from the Merrimack. And there's great science to this, of course, which has been in place for more than a century. But that's another reason we always have to be concerned about having a clean Merrimack River, because so many people still get their drinking water. And now that we're going to be having higher tides, there's going to be more flooding of the river. You may remember several years ago when Cashman Park had a couple feet of water on it. There were times when water was coming up very close to the old Black Cow. And so we know there's low-lying area next to the river and planning must be done to avoid that. So in addition to my research on storm surge, which I'm going to continue to look into, also some interesting statistics came out from the Merrimack River Watershed Council. That is located in Lawrence, Massachusetts. It includes members from both Newburyport, but Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And this is kind of a watchdog of the river. And we talk about a dirty river, and we talk about our wanting to clean it. One of the most significant reasons that the river is sometimes dirtier, not cleaner, is because of combined sewer overflows, CSOs. And that is when some sewage treatment plants upriver, such as Haverhill, Lawrence, Lowell, and Manchester, end up dumping effluent into the river. This happens because their pipes that carry rainwater from the city, collects the rainwater during storms, that goes into the sewage treatment plants. Now, in a drought or in a regular period of time, there's enough room in the sewage treatment plant to take the effluent, that the polluted product from homes and businesses, to mix with the rainwater, and everything's fine. It's all cleaned together and it goes into the river in a much cleaner state. But during heavy storms, a lot of water, rainwater, goes into the sewage treatment plants, and thus the plant can't handle it all, so it lets everything out. So effluent, in other words, pollution, goes straight into the Merrimack River. Now, here are a couple interesting statistics from the Watershed Council. About 510 million gallons of water per year goes into of CSO discharge goes into the Merrimack. That's 510 million gallons per year average of CSO discharge goes into the Merrimack River. And of course, the river is a very large body of water. It is always moving. It is resilient, as the title of my last book indicates. But still, that is effluent going into the river. And steps are being changed, but this is a statistic that I found quite significant: 510 million gallons per year of discharge going into the river. And a stat that's similar that goes along with this is that because of this CSO discharge, there is bad water in the river for about 20 to 40 days per year. And so their quote is 20 to 40 days per year average that a segment of the river is unsafe for use due to CSOs. So that's interesting to know. If you have a boat tied up on the river, if you want to go fishing, generally after big storms, you might be careful because there's effluent in the river. People are trying to change that. The city of Manchester, New Hampshire, the biggest polluter, recently announced plans to spend $231 million to significantly reduce their discharges of raw sewage into the Merrimack. That's over 20 years, but still, that is a wonderful development, $231 million. And in recent years, Lowell has invested $100 million over 15 years to reduce their sewage and wastewater runoff into the river. So those are a couple of good things that are happening. But as we say on the show, we think about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And so I bring these up. These are the first stats that I've seen, which actually says how much effluent is going into the river. I would mention that over the wintertime, Governor Baker signed legislation for mandating that sewage treatment plant managers tell communities downstream when they've had these CSO discharges. In other words, if they discharge after a big storm, they're required either to put it on their website or put it into an email, a blast email, and let people downstream know that a lot of effluent's in the water, and you might not want to take your boat out that day, and you certainly wouldn't want to go swimming. And this is one thing Newburyport Mayor Donna Holliday used to talk about. You know, Newburyport is at the end of the line when it comes to receiving CSOs. And some days they were rare, but nevertheless, after a 4 or 5 day deluge, you know, sometimes the river looked brown in parts. And this was because so much of these CSO discharges were going into the river. So I just mentioned that. Those are a couple of things that I was intrigued by, and improvements are being made. The Watershed Council is bringing forth improvements. Groups like Storm Surge are bringing forth improvements. And I just, at this time, wanted to mention and show some slides of a couple people who have really helped make the river cleaner over the years. Here's a picture of the Merrimack River. This is where the 2 jetties are. There's a sandbar in the middle, as you can see. And 2 jetties were put in, each for about $10 million or $20 million in federal money. Were created about 3 or 4 years ago and the purpose was for navigation. They want boats to be able to go up and down the river, and it may have affected the way the sands move, the way the tides move. It may have created more surges or more water coming over the dunes in the northern part of the island. But nevertheless, that's what happened. Here's the river. Here's the coast photos of the Coast Guard. This was the Newburyport is the birthplace of the Coast Guard, and many Coast Guard vessels come and go in the Merrimack River. The river can get dirty from time to time, but it's still a fine place to keep a boat. This shot is from Amesbury, as is this one, and across the way is Maudsley State Park. And this is a wonderful place, and boating is still a very popular thing to do in the Merrimack, and the boats are going in now as we speak. Haverhill's had a big comeback in recent years as the river's gotten cleaner. And here you can see condos, apartments, new business offices in their classrooms for Northern Essex Community College and for UMass Lowell. The National Park Service in Lowell has great boat tours, not during COVID, but they give people a ride down the river and talk about the history of Lowell as a mill city on the Merrimack. Here's a beautiful shot from Franklin, New Hampshire. This is where the river begins. I took this photo, I think last summer, and it looks like it must have looked centuries ago. It's, you know, there's white water, there's trees and bushes, and it's a wonderful place. The river starts as in the convergence of the Winnipesaukee River and the Pemmy River, and Franklin, New Hampshire is the place where it starts. Nashua, New Hampshire, the Nashua River meets the Merrimack in Nashua, New Hampshire. Here's a shot of Manchester, New Hampshire, the source of much hydropower. Here's a shot of Lowell, and there's much recreation to be had in Lowell. This is upriver from the factories and the mills. Here's a shot of Jim Kelcourse leading the way of the Voyagers in 2019. That's Lane Glenn, the president of Northern Essex Community College, behind him. They paddled 117 miles down the river, that's the entirety of the river, in 4 days. And here's another shot of the Voyagers in 2019. Well, this is one of my favorites at Newburyport, and has many vessels. It's been getting cleaner since 1972, and I think I hope it always gets a bit cleaner. Here's Jim Kelcourse, a state rep in the stern, and State Senator Diana DeZoglio in the bow. Ellen Swallow Richards was the first woman graduate of MIT, and she was one of the great pioneers in clean drinking water. She helped clean up the drinking water in Lowell and Lawrence in 1890 after outbreaks of typhoid, and was really a pioneer in drinking water. Ed Muskie, we're looking at right now, if you're on the radio, we're looking at Ed Muskie of Maine. He sponsored the Clean Water Act of 1972. And this is when the water started getting cleaner, and he really worked hard to make a clean Merrimack River, but also every river, including those in Maine. He grew up in Rumford, Maine, on the Androscoggin, and he worked very hard to get clean water. George Mitchell of Maine, who grew up in Waterville, Maine, on the Kennebec River, was responsible for amendments in 1987 that preserved a program for low-interest loans for sewage treatment plants. Paul Tsongas of Massachusetts, who you're looking at now, was a champion of Lowell and the Merrimack River. And we're coming to an end. We have a few more minutes, but I wanted to mention this is Joppa Radio 96.3, local cable TV channel 9, and we come here every week from 2 to 2:30 p.m. Next week, we're scheduled to hear John McCone of the Watershed Council, so that will be interesting. I like this photo of Senator Paul Tsongas, he and his wife Nikki when they were young, and of course she turned out to be a member of Congress herself after his death. Here's a beautiful shot of the resting place of Senator Tsongas on the Merrimack River in Lowell. And one of the things, here's a beautiful shot of the Merrimack Valley. You can see the beautiful Merrimack River there, but you can also see how many residential developments and businesses have sprouted up over the years. And one of the concerns about more development, particularly in southern New Hampshire, is because each time a development goes up, residential or an industrial park, you're taking down more trees, you're getting rid of more fields, and it makes it the water goes straight into the river at that time, or is picked up and goes to sewage treatment plants. But the more nature you take away, the more duress it puts on the Merrimack River. And here are three people, who played a role in clean water. That's Richard Nixon on your left. Hard to believe in a way, as he turned out to be quite a rogue during Watergate. But in 1970, Nixon, Hubert Humphrey in the center, and Ed Muskie on the right, all worked together to create the Environmental Protection Agency. That is very valuable. In 1970, they created it. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. Here's the end of our presentation. This is the beautiful Merrimack. This is from Moseley Pines in Newburyport. I think this shows, one of the beautiful sights of the river. Amesbury, Salisbury, Newburyport, we all benefit greatly from the river, and we're hoping it can stay. It'll get cleaner and not dirtier. And so people like the Watershed Council, like Storm Surge, and different institutions are working hard as spring arrives so that we can have a cleaner river.